And a warm welcome to a special Guide Talk segment. What is Guide Talk? Guide Talk is where we respectfully discuss biblical topics that are unscripted. And Faith Radio was nice enough to provide a hair and makeup stylist for us. I think we should stop payment on the check. Anyway, I'm surrounded here by the power panel. We have Pastor Tom Parrish, Jeff Verdoorn, and Dr. Peter Kapsner. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, Bill.
Hi, Bill. Quick question.
Good to be with you.
Any of you have live bait in your fridge?
Live bait. Not now.
That's a no?
No.
Nope. That's a good sign. We're off to a good start. Today, we're talking about forgiveness. That's the topic all month here at Faith Radio. And we're going to talk today individually and collectively about that very important topic. I'm going to start by asking Pastor Tom Parrish, what are some of your thoughts on forgiveness?
I'm going to start with a story that affected my whole ministry. Young man, 16, discovered he had a heart problem. And the doctor said he's got 3 months to live. And it was bad. And they had nobody to give him a heart transplant. Well, another family in town suddenly lost their son in an accident, but the heart was preserved and he was 17 years old. And the family went out of their way to say, we want this young man to have it. And he said that for the rest of his life, and I met him when he was in his 40s, he said that singular act of love changed my entire outlook on life. And that is what forgiveness is. When we receive the forgiveness of Jesus, it changes everything we do, how we look at others, how we forgive others, how we serve, because that's the power of forgiveness. And so I've lived by that, and I know how powerful and true it is.
That's great. Thank you, Tom Parrish. What are some thoughts that you have, Jeff?
Well, when you said that we were going to talk about forgiveness, my mind went right to one of the parables that I like, and it's the parable of the unmerciful servant. And the concept is that the kingdom, it starts out with the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with folks. Well, the first guy owes 10,000 talents. Now, that's millions and millions of dollars. So he has this super large, huge debt that he can't pay. And knowing that he can't pay it, he falls down on his knees before the master and basically says, have mercy on me. And it says that the master has mercy on him and cancels his debt. But then that servant turns around and there's another person that owes him, it says in the parable, 100 denarii. Now, a denarii is about a day's wage. So that's about 5 months worth of wages. So it's still a large debt, but it's not as big as the first guy's debt. Well, this guy decides not to forgive this small debt, even though he had been forgiven of this great debt. The master comes along, actually some other servants tell the master, and the master comes along and says, what are you doing, you wicked servant? I forgave you much. You should be forgiving also. Now, a couple of points. It is debated whether or not this first servant is actually saved, actually forgiven or not. There's this idea that one theologian I remember said it this way: we've all been redeemed, we all haven't been saved. In other words, Christ has paid for the sins of all of us. He has paid the debt sin for every single person. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. But in order to receive that forgiveness, that comes through faith in Jesus Christ. And once we put our faith in him, that redemption becomes real in our lives through the forgiveness from the blood of the Lamb. Now, obviously, I think, however, the main principle of this parable is that once we are saved, once we have received that forgiveness, God wants us then to be forgiving. Our debt, our sin debt, was paid by Christ, this large debt. So other debts are small in comparison in our relationships, and God wants us to be forgiving. So Ephesians 4:32 says it this way: be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ has forgiven you.
That's outstanding. This is the kind of quality talk you get on Guide Talk weekly. All right, Peter.
Yeah, I think just following up, Jeff, on what you had to say there, the passage that precedes that parable is Peter coming and asking Jesus this question: how many times am I supposed to forgive somebody? Is it 7 times? And Jesus offers this sort of strange answer. He says, no, I tell you, it's not 7 times. It's 7 times 7 in some translations, or 77 times in other translations. And the point is that Jesus is not giving a more extensive figure. So like if I had a grievance against you and you came and asked for forgiveness, that as long as I forgave you 77 times, Jeff, we're good to go. But 78, forget about it. It's over at that point. That's not what Jesus is suggesting. There's some symbolism going on in the numbers in Judaism in there. And what Jesus is saying to Peter is he's saying, I want you to cultivate a perpetual heart of forgiveness, meaning that I think so often we as believers think that forgiveness is just something we do from time to time, rather than an actual way in which we view the world. And I think that if we get into the heart of Jesus and why the heavens even opened to begin with, and why he came to die on the cross as he did, it was forgiveness that led the way. It was a heart that moved towards the world in that way. So I think we can safely go into the world and assume that we're going to be grieved by other people in some way. We're going to be hurt. There's going to be pain and sorrow, and people are going to do things that really hurt us in deep kinds of ways. And I think what Jesus is inviting us into, and the end of that parable that you read, I don't know if you just want to read it, those last couple of verses in 32, 33, 34. I mean, Jesus is talking about how important it is to have this heart of forgiveness. He says to the person who doesn't do what the forgiveness of the debt, he says, "You wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have paid mercy on your fellow servant just as I had done to you?" And in anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all that he was owed. Those are pretty serious statements in terms of what the invitation is. And I think maturing believers get anchored in a different kind of kingdom. So they walk in the world and assume they're probably going to be hurt at any given day, but they're prepared for that hurt, and they see and pass the hurt somehow and offer forgiveness to those. The last comment that we can make, the fullness of that forgiveness is what Jesus did on the cross, right?
So,
when he was experiencing this unjust suffering and torture and death at the hands of the people doing it, I don't think he was doing it through gritted teeth when he finally said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." I think from a place of brokenheartedness, Jesus was fully prepared that he was going to be broken by other people, and yet had a different kind of kingdom strength that turned and offered forgiveness in the midst of it. So to become a kingdom person means that you're leading with forgiveness just in the way you do your life.
Well said, Peter.
Wow.
Yeah, let's talk about the action part of forgiveness. And there's a story of 3 frogs on a log. One decides to jump. How many are left on the log? And the answer is 3. Even though one decided to do it,
Didn't do it.
didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And how forgiveness always requires an action on our part.
It does.
And sometimes that's the most difficult place, is people say, I can't act until I feel like I'm ready to. And I think we have to just reverse those.
Growing up in the church, I heard the Lord's Prayer every Sunday. We prayed it every Sunday, no matter what. What I never heard were the verses that followed the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. Jesus says, "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you," and it's in the continuous tense. "But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses." And I think we forget that our salvation, our redemption, our forgiveness is based upon what Jesus has done. And yet we don't earn any of it. But if we don't walk in that, we've got a problem on our hands. And Jesus says that our forgiveness now is the basis of how the Lord's going to continue to forgive us, which is a frightening thought, that if I'm bitter toward you, even though I have been given my heart to Jesus and I'm the pastor of a church, but if I'm bitter at you and I won't let it go and I won't truly try to walk in forgiveness, Jesus is saying here, you're in trouble, Tom, because I'm not going to forgive you anymore. I've never heard a sermon on this. I just haven't. I hardly hear it in the church. But I felt compelled to preach this one a couple of weeks ago because it's the word of Jesus. And we got to take the whole word into account because he knows how forgiveness really works.
Both of you guys bring up a great point that I'm thinking forgiveness is the admonition to the believer that we need to be forgiving. It's not so much for the other person that we are doing the forgiveness. It's for us. And you said a word, bitterness, just a second ago. And I think about that root of bitterness that could well up in the believer. If we withhold our forgiveness, if we don't take that action and jump off that log, that's typically the other person's not going to be affected at all. It's about us. Mm-hmm. It's about us getting right with the Lord and being forgiven just as God has been forgiving to us. So I think it's about our heart, our self, that is the key to forgiveness.
Yeah, and I can't I don't know about you guys. I can't do it myself. I mean, you bring up this idea of I
Great point.
feel, or don't feel to forgive somebody else. The strength that is required, it costs you something to forgive another person. And to offer that kind of forgiveness, I think it has to come flowing from God through you to the other person in some ways, because I think it's really hard when you're feeling so deeply hurt by another person. And again, forgiveness doesn't mean that the relationship has been restored and everything is fine. It just means that now there's not a power of sin at work in the relationship that will continue to disfigure it. Forgiveness creates the space where now trust can grow again, and the relationship can be growing and be restored. I mean, clearly the relationship is without sin, but it doesn't mean it's great in the moment between husband and wife, or between father and child, between coworkers. It just creates space where that power of sin is not at work.
It's a great point. If I can, forgiveness, there's consequences to sin.
For sure.
I can forgive someone, say they weren't faithful with some money that I gave them or something, and they wronged me. I can forgive them, but I may not trust them with my money again the next time either. So there are consequences to
I think the Lord taught me something years ago, because I would have people come to me for counseling. Bitterness, resentment, hurt in their life, it was all there. And they said, but Pastor, I love Jesus. I just can't forgive my father. I just can't forgive what these other people did to me. And I don't know why. One day I was sitting there and I said, okay, let's do just a little visualization. I want you to see that other person that you're bitter toward. And as you're looking at them and you don't want to forgive them, I want Jesus to step between you two with his hands outstretched and saying, for my sake, forgive them. Mm-hmm. And I have learned that's the only way I can forgive my enemies. They don't deserve it. They're not asking for it. But for Jesus' sake, I can do it because of what he's done for me.
Yeah, I think one other piece of the puzzle that's been helpful for me at times is I once had a pastor that gave a sermon and said, so when is the last time you got in touch with your depravity? When is the last time you got in touch with your depravity? It was not an award-winning sermon, right? But it was such an important sermon, because I think to the extent that you realize that you've been forgiven in your own depravity, it does begin to break you. It's part of what's in that parable that you read, right? I mean, that servant had just been forgiven, and yet somehow that didn't break him in some kind of way to turn and offer forgiveness to others.
Our debt of sin to God is the 10,000 talents, a debt that no one can pay. And once we realize that, the forgiveness that we need to be offering in this plane, on this horizontal plane, those debts are nowhere near the sin debt owed to God.
I've had people actually come to me and say, Pastor, how do I know if I'm really walking with Jesus? And over the years, I've said to them, how willing are you to forgive your enemies? Mm. And that's where we start the discussion. And once that happens, it's amazing what they discover.
What's the question?
The person would come to me and they say, how do I know I'm walking with Jesus?
Well, are you listening to Guy Talk?
Well, that's part of it. That would help.
That would definitely help. And now, listen, watch. I mean, it's everything.
I'm for it.
Yeah, we're everywhere.
We are.
So, yeah. So, yeah. Can you think of someone in your life that you secretly think, I wish they would come apologize to me? Do you have someone that you could think of? Because I have someone.
Sure.
Well, let me get my list.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then I wonder if there's someone out there wishing I would come apologize to them. And so I just do a mental check-in with myself to see if there's someone out there that I should take initiative, I should take the step towards and ask for forgiveness.
And I think I even have those people that have apologized to me, but it didn't seem like terribly sincere.
Yeah.
So I've held it against them, but then it's the same thing that you just did. I flipped the question around. I think, how many times have I said that I'm sorry, mostly because I thought I should, not because I actually cared about the forgiveness part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I got an email from a young man who I evidently grew up with in elementary school. I don't know how he found me, but he did. And he said, I like your articles. You're really good. But when are you ever going to deal with the fact that you beat me up as a kid? I honestly don't remember beating him up. But I sent an email back and I said, please forgive me. I was wrong to have done that. I should have never done that. And that's not the way we're supposed to live because of Jesus. And he wrote me back and he was stunned. He was stunned that I would actually do that.
What's your friend's name?
Yeah. His name is Bill.
Bill? Just got back for Bill. There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir, for joining us today. And as we talk about forgiveness this whole month, may you seek forgiveness from Jesus in your heart and with others. Thanks for watching.